Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbaugh.
Need a powerful and entertaining way to ignite your next conference, retreat, or team building session? My keynotes don't include magic, but they do have the power to help your attendees take a leap forward by putting emotional intelligence into their employee engagement, and customer-centric leadership practices. So bring the infotainment creativity of the Fast Leader Show to your next event, and I'll help your attendees get over the hump now. Go to beyondmorale.com/speaking to learn more. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because the person that I have on the show has the opportunity to share with us things that can impact the employee experience, the customer experience, and your leadership skills and help you move forward faster. Charles Vogl was born and raised in Orange County, California with a younger brother and sister, but they spent a lot of time in Honolulu, Hawaii visiting his mother's family. A commitment to making a difference has always been a crucial part of Charles's life. In his early 20s, he volunteered full-time at a homeless shelter in Santa Ana, California, before entering the United States Peace Corps and relocating to Northern Zambia. There, he witnessed inspirational community in the face of extreme poverty, as those with very little shared with those who had even less. Charles then moved to New York City to become a filmmaker, producing documentaries, including the 2006 documentary film New Year Baby, which chronicled the lives of Cambodian genocide survivors as they became Americans. It won numerous awards, including Amnesty International's prestige Movies That Matter. At the same time, he also volunteered as a secret labor organizer, working to empower abused workers in the restaurant industry. Charles received his BS from the Annenberg School at the University of Southern California and a Master of Divinity at Yale University. A regular guest lecturer at several Yale departments, his first book, The Art of Community, 7 Principles for Belonging, was recently published by Barrett Kohler. Building on the concept that community and belonging can be developed through time-tested ideas and rituals, The Art of Community is a guide to creating and fostering meaningful communities that benefit individuals and humanity as a whole. An author and executive consultant, Charles Vogl helps leaders in technology, finance, media, government, and social good organizations to become more effective in creating meaningful change. Using principles drawn from more than 3,000 years of community and spiritual tradition, he teaches others how to inspire powerful connections in critical relationships in order to produce the kind of change that impacts generations. Charles includes surviving a plane crash, a spitting cobra attack, and acute malaria, all in 1 year among his life's challenging experiences. Charles currently lives in Oakland, California with his wife, Sachita. Charles Vogl, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I'm delighted to be here. Let's take on the hump.
I appreciate it. Now, I've given our Legion a little bit about you, but can you tell us what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
Well, my current passion is helping Americans who may be living in the most lonely generation in American history, possibly, create the connections that make life rich. And I've been shocked to find out how many of us do or have felt extremely lonely and are really unaware how we can invest ourselves or create the communities around us that make our lives rich and give us meaning.
You know, I had the opportunity to actually see you speak, and I found a couple of statistics that you presented to be quite shocking. One of them had to do with that, our personal networks have decreased by 1/3 in the last 2 generations. Mm-hmm. Yet, when we think about social media, social platforms, all of that, you would not get that perception. I mean, how is that such a false perception that we have in regards to social connectivity versus reality?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. So it's important to distinguish people that we can find information about and people who are in our community. And for the purposes of my work, I define community as a people together who care about the welfare of one another. And for those of us who have over 1,000 friends in a social network account, I'm not convinced that all 1,000 of those people care day to day about my welfare. And certainly I'm not taking time to care about their welfare every day or even every week. And so while there may be people we can connect with, it's hard to say that they're really in a community. And one of the shorthands that I use in the book, just to help us understand who our personal communities might be, are the people who I call 3 a.m. friends, that term coined by one of my friends while I was in grad school. And he was referring to the friends that we can call at 3 a.m. and we're confident that A, they will pick up, and that when they pick up, they'll take action if that's what we need them to do. And so one of the questions I ask the leaders I work with is, who are your 3 a.m. friends that you can call, but even more importantly, who are the people in your life who know that you're their 3 a.m. friend? And if in fact they call you at 3 a.m., you'll be delighted they did, and they'll take action when the phone rings.
That's a very interesting, not just more than just concept that you bring up. I had a discussion with one of my daughter's friends' parents, and she was talking about something that you were just referring to in regards to church friends and school friends for her daughter. Mm-hmm. And she was saying how when you think about those conversations that are so intimate and so close to you, that most people don't have those conversations that are young with their school friends. They will have them with their church friends. Mm-hmm. But when we start talking about the community component, we have a situation in our society where more, or I should say less and less people are actually going to church and kids participating in church. And I mean, is that part of what's contributing to this whole societal shift and having smaller communities and networks?
It's part of it. We know that Americans are, largely speaking, leaving churches and synagogues as they did attend in the 1970s. Still, 8 out of 10 Americans, as I understand it, still claim identification with a spiritual tradition, but they're not attending as they did a generation ago. And churches and synagogues and other institutions around faith are really great places to meet people who share values, and then, as you mentioned, have conversations consistent with that, and to build the relationships that allow us to talk about vulnerabilities, right? And it's when we're vulnerable, it's often when we most need help or want help. And it's when others are willing to be vulnerable with us, it's often when we're most inspired to offer support. So definitely institutions like churches are one of the reasons. But Americans are leaving churches often for really good reasons. And what I mean by that is the churches are not representing the values of their generation or their time. And it's hard to say that someone should continue to support an institution or simply show up in an institution that's not sharing their values. What we're seeing, though, is we're not seeing other institutions providing that role in someone's life. And maybe it's not important that any institution does that, but what we can acknowledge is those relationships aren't then being formed in that way. And so one of the things that I talk about is there are concepts, ancient concepts that we can use in our lives, be that in our family, at school, in a faith tradition, or even just among friends, such that we can build those relationships using those concepts outside of the same institution that's creating structure.
Well, and I think for me, when I had the opportunity to learn more and more about, the art of community and the 7 principles for belonging, is that I started seeing connections with work. I started seeing connections with how, the marketplace, or let's just say people within, our society look to brands for some of that, intimacy and closeness and, emotional connection that, again, maybe we didn't see a couple decades ago. And now the whole customer experience is taking on a whole different meaning than it has in the past. So when you start thinking about being able to leverage the work that you've done, how can a company really do that for their employees and really affect their culture?
Yeah, well, this is a fascinating area. So for the purposes of my work, I define a community as a group of people who care about one another's welfare. And typically we come together in our communities because there's some shared values. We may not all share all of the same values, but there are some values that we share, right? And you can imagine it'd be very hard to see people and care about them if you share no values. And I think one of the reasons you're bringing up the brand issue, why people turn to brands maybe for some kind of identity or this perception they're part of something bigger, is sophisticated brands and hopefully authentic brands are really messaging around value, right? And there may be a perception that if you meet other people who are participating in that brand, they're sharing those values. I can't say how much the people who are promoting that brand or buying from that brand are going to help you out in your life when you have crises, but maybe that's a place to start to meet people with shared values. As far as your workplace goes, one of the things I tell leaders who work with me is that if a community is a group of people who care about one another's welfare, if you have a team or building a team and you want everyone on that team to care about the success and failures of other people on that team, you're building community if you know it or don't. And the way some managers handle that is they just declare we're a community, and then that's the end of it. And I think we all know that's kind of silly. And just saying a group is a community doesn't make it so. And that's why I've written a book that shares some concepts, like the boundary concepts and inner ring concepts and the ritual concepts, so that someone who wants to take a group of people who share some values and make them into a community that really cares about the welfare of one another, there's some levers they can pull to get there from here.
Also, I think something that stood out to me that was quite interesting especially when you start talking about, the workplace, and it can even be connected with brands. You started talking about the everything or nothing conundrum.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, when I talked with leaders about building communities, one of the concepts I say is really important is to have a boundary. And I say this is important because if we look at communities over the several thousand years that have faced existential threats, so Sikh communities in India, Jainists, obviously the Jewish tribes. When we look at communities that have faced existential threat and have been able to stay together, often for over 1,000 years, it's very clear who's inside and outside, so that we know that if someone's under threat, we know when are we going to spend our resources to go save that person, when are we not. And I often get pushback, and they say, well, Charles, boundaries are bad. Anytime you're excluding anybody, it's bad. And one of the things that I point out is if you want to build a strong community, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't know who's in your community, it's very hard to invest in creating stronger relationships within that community because you don't know who's on the inside. And to know who's on the inside, there needs to be some kind of boundary. But we can flip that around. Let's say that we go along with the sentiment that boundaries are bad and communities should have no boundaries. Well, if I go around the world and I start meeting people and you have no boundary in your community, I can't tell the difference between no community and people in your community, because everybody I talk to should be or is in fact in your community. And if communities are bounded by values, one of the questions I can ask these leaders, is there anybody in the world who doesn't share the values that someone needs to have to be in your community? Anybody. And the answer is there's one person, well, then there is some boundary, even if it's a very large one. And the way that we prevent ourselves from being just jerks who keep people out of our communities is once we figured out what are the values to be in our community. So in my book, I write about a dinner community that we had in Connecticut while I was in graduate school. If someone didn't value meeting strangers, sharing an uninterrupted meal for 4 hours, sharing about themselves, they shouldn't be in our community. There's nothing wrong with wanting to spend your evening dancing or karaoke. That's just not what we do there. So if we make sure that there's an access point through the boundary for people who are valued as we are valued, then we can think of the boundary less about keeping people out, i.e. people who don't have dinner over long hours with strangers, but how do we keep the inside safe? And once we know that there's a boundary there to keep people unsafe, now we can make decisions consistent with who we let in and how we let in and how we don't. And most healthy communities are constantly letting people in or inviting people in because that's how you stay relevant in the world.
I think you also shared the word, but you also within your book shared a lot about this whole piece associated with values. Mm-hmm. And I've talked with previous guests about our inability to be able to identify our values because we just don't go through that discovery process. It's not something that just kind of comes to us, as some type of, divine or, happenstance or, piece of luck. I mean, we have to intentionally go through to be able to identify our values so that we can seek out those communities, because otherwise we don't even know where we belong if we find one.
Right.
So when you start thinking about that whole values piece, how has that impacted the ability for people to help and find their own community?
Well, I think it's great that you're pointing out that it's not always so clear cut. And what I tell leaders is I don't really care what values are on your website. I was once speaking with the executive director of a fairly famous nonprofit here in the United States with a famous brand, and he was telling me the values of their organization. I'm not going to reveal the organization here. When he was done, I asked him, How are those values any different than that of the U.S. Marine Corps? Integrity, right, bravery. And he paused over lunch and then said, well, I guess there's no difference of those values. Now, there's nothing wrong with those values and having values that overlap with what the U.S. Marine Corps, but it clearly didn't actually define what drew people to that nonprofit, which is to say they hadn't really figured it out. And that means they get to start that journey. One of the things that I look for to figure out what are the real values, not simply what's on the website, are what are the stories that people are telling. One of the questions I ask is, who do you protect? And how do you protect them, right? And through those stories, those are how the real values are revealed. And when we're seeking out of community, my guess is we're going to be inspired by the communities that tell the stories of their existence, of their purpose, of how they've changed, that resonate with us, that those stories have inside them the values that we're seeking to grow in ourselves. And one of the most important things about healthy communities is they're providing every member a way to grow into the way that we want to be.
Now, finding communities, being lonely, all of those things are wrapped up in emotions and can be very impactful. And one of the things that we look at on the show are quotes to help bring out emotion for us. Is there a quote or two that kind of stands out that you can share?
Oh, my goodness. Well, one of my favorite quotes of 20th century wisdom is by a monk named Thomas Merton. And in a letter that he wrote, which is now published, he wrote, "In the end, it is the reality of personal relationships that save everything." And the reason I like about that is it reminds me that when big things are happening that scare me, violence, oppression, poverty, and I feel powerless, or my work seems to be ineffective, at the end of the day, it's the relationships with the people that I know and the conversations that I'm having with them that really matter. And it reminds me that every conversation matters, even if it doesn't look like it's changing the world while it's having it.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I had the opportunity to, as I said, listen, watch you speak and read as much of the book as I can since I received it and us having this interview. And you definitely got very personal and vulnerable. And a lot of the things were associated with humps that you had to get over throughout your life. Is there a story that you can share with us that really tells us about a time where, you got over the hump and it made a difference for you?
Oh my goodness, there's so many. Since we talked about the book, I will share in the book, I write a little bit of how I served in the U.S. Peace Corps in Northern Zambia. And I'll tell you, I was dropped off in a village in Northern Zambia where there were about 150 families. I lived in a mud house with a grass roof and a mud floor. And I was speaking a language I didn't know, food I was unfamiliar with, in a place as foreign to me as possible, the bush of Northern Zambia, from what I knew of Southern California. And I was just so exhausted, and I got really sick, and I would cry at night from the exhaustion and the stress, a young man trying to be on an adventure. And there was a family that lived next door to me, the Mwongo family. And I remember, I think it was the first day, they sent Alex, their teenage son, over to my home with fresh ubwadi, which is a paste made out of a cassava root, and some dried fish, because they wanted to make sure that I was fed that day. And how they expressed in physically showing up and sending a gift that I was welcome there. And they're a reminder to me, not only the Mwongos, but the whole Lupasoshi village, that I didn't look like them. Goodness knows I didn't act like them. They could tell right away I didn't speak like them. And yet they went out of their way to welcome me as much as they knew how. And they're an example to me that we can be brave with our invitation. Now, I might have turned out to be a total jerk. I might have turned out to be someone just trying to take advantage of them. I could have been somebody who was spying on them for the U.S. government for all they knew. And they might have discovered those things. Maybe our relationship would have changed. But nonetheless, they were brave with their invitation, and their bravery changed my life. And now I've written a book about community, and as you said, my introduction, witnessing how people cared for one another in Northern Zambia with no health care, hauling water from a river a kilometer away changed my life.
So, and it really was very touching when you started talking about, and there's a lot of more detail associated even with the Peace Corps members that you were with and how all that community did or didn't happen. And I definitely recommend people picking up the book. But if you were to say, of all the things that you have going, and I know, being on the book tour and doing a lot of speaking engagements, continuing your work, what are some of your goals?
Well, right now, one of the goals that we have is to reach out to both faith leaders across the country that are really working to find a way to make faith institutions in this country speak to a generation that right now is not excited about it. And I think we can acknowledge they're not excited about it because it's not exciting to them. To find a way to genuinely make an institution where Americans believe they belong when their own faith experiences and their longing are consistent with coming together, right? But doing it in a place that shares their value of inclusivity and participation. And one of our other goals is to reach out to C-level executives at companies across the country that understand that their success in the marketplace with customers and their success in building teams for the company to work involves creating a place where people know they belong. And they know they belong there because there are values there that are represented and are important for belonging. And they can use the concepts in the book that have been used for well over 1,000 years, the rituals and, as I said, inner ring and storytelling to create that place. And since we know that Americans are, as you read in the book, seemingly desperate to connect more, to have that community that they know they can turn to train leaders to build that, not just making stuff up willy-nilly or naively, but turning to long-standing wisdom to do that is a very exciting adventure for me.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. The number one thing that contributes to customer loyalty is emotions. So move onward and upward faster by gaining significantly deeper insight and understanding of your customer journey and personas with emotional intelligence. With your empathy mapping workshop, you'll learn how to evoke and influence the right customer emotions that generate improved customer loyalty and reduce your cost to operate. Get over your emotional hump now by going to empathymapping.com to learn more. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Charles, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Charles Vogl, are you ready to hoedown?
I'm ready for hoedown.
All right. So what do you think is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Oh my goodness. I'm afraid of things. I'm afraid of reaching out to people who I think are uninterested in me. I'm afraid of making phone calls that I think people don't want. I'm afraid of sharing myself in a way that people will laugh at me and then record it digitally, and there'll be evidence of my silliness for years to come. And when I finally get over that I'm not that big a deal and that what I'm out to do is far bigger than my ego, I'll definitely be more effective.
And what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
To put my body where the action is happening. Emails don't count. Phone calls don't count. Letters don't count. To actually show up where I need to be to make a difference, and I'm looking to do.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
I think one of the secrets to my success right now is I remind myself throughout the day and during my quiet time every morning in meditation and prayer to not strive. That if my vision is bold enough, if my actions are consistent enough, success, as I will find it, will come. But I don't need to worry about that success. I just need to take the action consistent with generating a difference made in the world.
What do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
One of the most important tools I have is acknowledging the people around me that make a profound difference for me, support me, and hold me up. And making sure that I'm communicating how important they are to my life. Not as some trick, but as a person who's aware that nothing I do is from my own success alone. It's because there's a community working with me.
What would be one book, and it could be from any genre, that you recommend to our listeners? And of course, we're going to put a link to The Art of Community on your show notes page.
One of my favorite books is Trusted Advisor by Meister, because in all relationships, if they're powerful relationships, there'll be a time where if we're a good friend, we'll say something someone doesn't want to hear. And that book gave me tools that I needed so that when I have that conversation, I can be more effective in telling someone I care about something they may not be ready to hear from someone.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Charles Vogl. Okay, Charles, this is my last Hump Day Hold On question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you've been given the opportunity to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take everything back. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
I think I would tell myself that the titles don't matter. The vision counts, and inviting other people to join that counts way more than the titles, accolades, or awards that may look important when we're 25.
Charles, it was an honor to spend time with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Yeah. There's my website, charlesvogl.com. That's charlesvogl.com. And on that website, we have a quiz that leaders can take to get a sense of how much they're aware of the tools to build community in whatever team they're leading. And there's a preview of the book. Several chapters are available for free. Download right away.
Charles Vogl, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Woo-hoo! Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.